Good Saturday morning, everyone, and welcome into October. Today is October the 1st, and we're reading together from Revelation chapter 18. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Hope that you've had a great week, and we're looking forward to a great weekend. Maybe we're going to end up being mostly spared from a lot of the rain that Hurricane Ian has been dumping on the land. And but we're please continue praying for those who are affected by the hurricane down in Florida and the Tampa area and inward, and also continue to pray for Zach and Caden while they're down there. And not just them, but I think I saw a post that there were 42,000 linemen that were stationed and ready to go down in Florida to do work down there. It's dangerous work. But they do a lot of good helping people to get their power back on and such. So please be praying for them. And we're thankful for the ways in which they serve other people. For today, though, we're reading in Revelation chapter 18 and reading honestly about the exact polar opposite of those who serve other people. We're going to read today about Babylon and the characteristics of Babylon and why Babylon is just so bad. Well, what's the problem with Babylon? What makes Babylon so antithetically opposed to God? We're going to read about that today. We're going to read about its fall and everything associated with that. And again, we're not reading Revelation in a linear fashion, because I don't believe Revelation was written in a linear fashion, because what we're talking about here is the fall of Babylon. But once we get to chapter 20, we're going to see another fall of just evil in general, where the Satan is crushed there in chapter 20. So are we talking about different things? Are we talking about one fall of Babylon and then one fall of the Satan on the day of the Lord? I don't think so. I think we're just reading different ways that it is described. Again, I think Revelation is written in a cyclical type of way. And of course, it is very symbolic in nature because it is an apocalyptic type of writing. And is an ancient style of writing that had been familiar to the Jews of the first century. They were familiar with this style of writing because there's a number of non-canonical books that were written during the time of silence 400 years prior to Christ. So they were familiar with this type of writing. They recognized it as a prophecy, not just foretelling, but also foretelling, telling what would happen in the future, yes, but also giving God's perspective on the current events that they were facing under severe Roman persecution. And it was written, of course, to a specific people at a specific place and time for a specific purpose, to encourage them. And yet the encouragement that they gained from the reality that the Lamb will conquer, or the Lamb would conquer, and he would do so because he is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and that those who are with him are called, they're chosen, they're faithful. That encouraged them in their time, but also needs to continue to encourage us today, as Babylon, in a real sense, continues to remain alive because the system of evil that has been present in the world since the time of the fall and shortly thereafter continues to be true today. That there are many forces that are against God, wicked, evil, supernatural forces against God, and they have a strong influence on this world. And we need to make sure that we are standing against Babylon, not pledging our faithfulness and allegiance to Babylon, but remaining faithful to the Lamb. Again, being a part of those who are recognized as called, chosen, and faithful. So let's read about the fall of Babylon the Great here. Again, we're reading Babylon and recognizing this as being just a system of evil that exists in the world then, and it continues to exist today, thinking all the way back to the Tower of Babel and the events surrounding it. It's where we get the origin of the name Babylon, and it continues to be representative of the evil that exists in the world today. Again, just a system of evil, the overall presence and influence of evil today, I think, is being discussed here. What I want to do with this particular reading here in chapter 18 is I want us to, as we're reading through, I invite you to pay close attention to the real sins of Babylon. What is it that Babylon has done, or what type of environment does Babylon create that makes it so opposed to God? I invite you to try to take note of that as we read throughout this text. It is sprinkled, I believe, throughout this text here of Babylon 18. One of the longer chapters here in Revelation, but nonetheless, let's go ahead and get to it. Revelation 18, verse number 1, after this. After this, I saw another angel with great authority coming down from heaven, and the earth was illuminated by his splendor. He called out in a mighty voice, "It has fallen. Babylon the Great has fallen. She has become a home for demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, and a haunt for every unclean and despicable beast. For all the nations have drunk the wine of her sexual immorality, which brings wrath. The kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown wealthy from her sensuality and excess." Then I heard another voice from heaven, "Come out from her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins or receive any of her plagues, for her sins are piled up to heaven, and God has remembered her crimes. Pay her back the way she also paid, and double it according to her works. In the cup in which she mix a double portion for her. As much as she glorified herself and indulged her sensual and excessive ways, give her that much torment and grief. For she says in her heart, I sit as a queen. I am not a widow, and I will never see grief. For this reason, her plagues will come in just one day, death and grief and famine. She will be burned up with fire, because the Lord God who judges her is mighty. The kings of the earth who have committed sexual immorality and shared her sensual and excessive ways will weep and mourn over her when she sees the smoke from her burning. They will stand far off in fear of her torment, saying, Woe, woe, the great city, Babylon, the mighty city, for in a single hour your judgment has come. The merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her, because no one buys their cargo any longer. Cargo of gold, silver, jewels, and pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, and scarlet, all kinds of fragrant wood products, objects of ivory, objects of excessive wood, brass, iron, and marble, cinnamon, spice, incense, myrrh, and frankincense, wine, olive oil, fine flour, and grain, cattle and sheep, horses and carriages, and slaves, human lives. The fruit you craved has left you. All your splendor and glamorous things are gone. They will never find them again. The merchants of these things who became rich from her will stand off in fear of her torment, weeping and moaning, saying, Woe, woe, the great city, dressed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, adorned with gold, jewels, and pearls, for in a single hour her such fabulous wealth was destroyed. And every shipmaster, seafarer, and sailor, and all who did business by sea stood far off as they watched the smoke from her burning and kept crying loud, Who was like the great city? They threw dust on their heads and kept crying out, weeping and mourning, Woe, woe, the great city, where all those who have ships on the sea became rich from her wealth. For in a single hour she was destroyed. Rejoice over her, heaven, and you saints, apostles, prophets, because God has pronounced on her the judgment she passed on you. Then the mighty angel picked up a stone like a large millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, In this way, Babylon the Great will be thrown down violently and never be found again. The sound of harpists, musicians, flutists, and trumpeters will never be heard in you again. No craftsman of any trade will ever be found in you again. The sound of a mill will never be heard in you again. The light of a lamp will never shine in you again. The voice of a groom and bride will never be heard in you again. All this will happen because of your merchants, or the nobility of the earth, because all the nations were deceived by her sorcery. In her was found the blood of prophets and saints, and of all those slaughtered on the earth. Revelation chapter 18, the fall of Babylon the Great. So what did you notice? What did you notice as being the sins that were associated with Babylon? Again, I believe Babylon representing primarily for them at that time Rome, but overall, generally speaking, just the entire system of evil that exists in the world today, just as it existed back then. Well, what I saw first and foremost is that it had been a home for demons, haunt for every unclean spirit, every unclean bird, every unclean and despicable beast. It was a place that supported evil and wickedness, that is opposed to God, rebellion against God. There's also language of the nations being drunk with the wine of her sexual immorality. They were talking about those who have grown wealthy from her sensuality and excess. Now, this language of sexual immorality, I think, is representative more of idolatry. Remember, it's used like that in the writings of the Old Testament in regards to Israel, how Israel had committed adultery against God. Well, it's not literal physical adultery. It was talking about spiritual adultery, that they had gone after the nation, the pagan gods of the nations. They had gone after the idols and the evil forces that they represented. That's what they had done. And part of that was that they used their power that they amassed to commit great injustices, to fail in the second greatest command that Jesus spoke of, to love your neighbor as yourself. No, the merchants of the earth have grown wealthy from her sensuality and excess. They are excessive in all their ways. They take what should be shared with others. They're greedy and prideful and arrogant. Again, excess is something that's mentioned on a number of occasions. Again, sensuality and excessive ways in verse number 7. Again, I think idolatry is mentioned again in verse number 9. The kings of earth who have committed sexual immorality with her and shared in her sensual and excessive ways will weep and mourn over her. Again, just being wrapped up in evil, being wrapped up in different characteristics that are so opposed to God, not love, not grace, not mercy, but pride, arrogance, hatefulness, evil, paganism. All of these are the sins of Babylon. And again, generally speaking, this has been true from the introduction of sin into the world. There has continued to be these various things. It was the problem in the garden. It's the problem in Genesis 6. It's the problem in Genesis 11. It's been the problem ever since. And these are the issues that God's people have been fighting against. They've been struggling against being caught up in these type of sins and these type of rebellious ways against God. The nations surrounding Israel were constantly trying to influence Israel to be more pagan, to go after the idols, go after their gods, to do all the things associated with them, all these acts of immorality. But God's people are told to stand strong. We are told to stand strong. For again, we need to recognize that if we take the side of the Lamb, then just as he will conquer, we will conquer too. But if not, then we will be caught up in the same judgment that all evil forces will endure on the day of judgment. The great day of the Lord, whenever Jesus returns to render that judgment, we will be caught up in that as well if we side with Babylon. Again, whose mark do we hold? Do we hold the mark of the Lamb? Do we have his name on our foreheads? Or do we hold the mark of the beast because we've aligned with the evil that exists in this world, that exists in this world? It was true in the first century. It's true in the 21st century, friends. May we take heed. May we make sure that we are aligned with the side of God. Thanks so much for tuning into this reading on this Saturday. Again, have a great rest of your Saturday. May God bless you. Look forward to reading with you again in the morning as we're reading together in Revelation chapter 19. And just as a little bit of a peek into what we're going to be doing, I did all the tallying, and I think from the day that we finish this read, which will be on Wednesday, let's see here, Wednesday, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So October 5th will be our last read through the New Testament. Once we finish that, we will have read through the entire New Testament this year. If you've been along with us all throughout the way, good on you. You can now say that you have read the entire New Testament. But beginning on the 6th, we want to continue reading in our Bibles on a daily basis. So what we're going to do is we're going to start reading through Job and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. That's where we're going to finish our read this year. I believe from October 6th through December 31st, that is 87 days. 87 days. And what's super cool is that Job, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes has 85 chapters. So we will just have 2 days off. We'll take off Thanksgiving. We'll take off Christmas. Just so we have 2 days there. That way we have the right amount that we were finishing in Ecclesiastes. The last chapter of Ecclesiastes, I believe, is chapter 12. We'll finish up Ecclesiastes 12 on the last day of this year. And then we'll launch into our daily Bible reading for next year on the first day of January. I think what we want to do, what I want to do next year is want to start reading through the Old Testament, start in Genesis and read through all the historical writings in the Old Testament going, what is it? I think it's Genesis through Esther. I think that's what we're going to read next year, Genesis through Esther. For the most part, it'll be one chapter. I think there's like 71 days. We're going to double up chapters. So I'll just go through and look. And some of those chapters that are shorter right beside each other, we'll just squeeze those together and have that read for next year. Going another 365-day read. And if you go through that with us, then that will mean that for this year and for next year, for 2022 and 2023, we will have read together all of the New Testament, all of the prophets, all of the Old Testament history books, and the only thing left would be to read the wisdom literature, which we might just end up doing in 2024. That's really thinking really far ahead, but I'm just throwing it out there to see that might be something we think about doing that following year. That way we can say over that 3 years, together as a church family, we'll have read through the entire Bible over the span of that 3 years. That's a pretty cool thing to do. We'll see. We'll see if that's what we want to do or not. But again, thanks so much for tuning into this reading. Have a good Saturday, everyone. We'll be back at it again tomorrow as we read together on October the 2nd, Sunday, in Revelation chapter 19. Looking forward to reading that with you then. Take care. God bless.